If you grew up in the United States, chances are you remember the shape of a school bus long before you ever learned your ABCs. Maybe it was the rumble of a diesel engine rolling down a quiet street at sunrise, or the smell of warm vinyl seats on a cold winter morning. Maybe it was that first step up the narrow stairs, clutching a lunchbox, staring down a long aisle filled with voices, backpacks, and sunlight. For nearly a century, the yellow school bus has been more than transportation. It's been a daily ritual, a moving piece of American childhood shared by millions. And while the designs changed over the decades, a few models became unforgettable. These weren't just buses, they were the backdrop of growing up. So tonight, let's take a quiet ride back through time and revisit the 10 school buses America's children never forgot. 1960s to 2000s, Bluebird All-American. There's a reason the Bluebird All-American feels like the classic school bus in the American imagination. With its flat nose, transit-style layout, and the front door tucked right up against the wheel, you could spot one from a block away. For decades, this Type D silhouette rolled through every corner of the country, from the Midwest plains to the humid South, becoming as common in morning traffic as station wagons and stop signs. Kids who grew up in the 1970s through the early 2000s remember it well. The thick vinyl seats that stuck to your legs in summer, the heavy manual door that folded shut with a big metal clack, and the deep, echoing roar of a rear-mounted diesel engine pushing the bus up a long hill. You saw it in movies, on TV specials, and in Friday afternoon pickup lines outside brick schools. For millions of American children, the All-American wasn't just another bus. It was the school bus, the one that defined the look, the sound, and the feel of getting to class in the United States. 1970s to 2000s, Thomas Saf-T-Liner Conventional. If the Bluebird All-American was the country's flat-nosed icon, then the Thomas Saf-T-Liner Conventional was the long-nosed workhorse that shaped childhood in small-town America. That square Type C hood, tall, proud, unmistakably boxy, could be recognized from the end of a gravel driveway. In the South and along the East Coast, these buses were everywhere, rolling past farms, churchyards, and two-lane country roads just after sunrise. Kids remember the sound first, that heavy folding door slamming shut with a sharp clank that echoed through the cabin. And then the look, a deep, bold shade of school bus yellow sitting high off the ground, easy to spot long before it reached your stop. For many children, this was the bus they sprinted toward, backpack bouncing, hoping the driver would wait those extra 2 seconds before pulling away. The Saf-T-Liner Conventional blended into everyday life so completely that it became part of the landscape, a familiar shape moving across morning fog or late autumn light. For countless American families, especially in rural and suburban communities, this wasn't just a school bus. It was a daily ritual, a dependable companion, and one of the most memorable long-hooded designs ever to carry kids to class. 2004 to present, International, ICE. By the mid-2000s, a new shape began showing up in school parking lots across America. Sharper edges, tougher lines, and a stance that looked ready to work. Built on the International 3300 chassis, the ICE had a bold, squared-off profile that immediately set it apart from the softer curves of earlier generations. And for kids growing up between 1995 and 2010, this bus wasn't just familiar, it was their bus. Most students rode a CE at least once, to class, to after-school programs, to Friday football games. The sound of a DT 466 or Max Force waking up on a chilly morning became part of the routine, that deep diesel rumble drifting through quiet neighborhoods just before sunrise. Inside, everything felt new. A modern dashboard, a cleaner layout for the driver, and that smooth, sliding entrance door that opened with a soft hiss instead of a heavy metal thud. For more than 15 years, The ICCE has been the most common school bus in the United States, serving cities, suburbs, and rural districts alike. For millennials and Gen Z, this wasn't a symbol from a movie or a nostalgic photograph. It was the everyday ride, the bus their generation grew up on, and the one they still remember in vivid detail. 2003 to present, Bluebird Vision. When the Bluebird Vision first appeared in the early 2000s, it didn't take long for students, or drivers, to notice something different. The front end wasn't sharp and square like the old international buses, nor was it bulky and heavy-looking. Instead, the Vision carried a softer, rounded nose that made it instantly recognizable among Type C designs. But the real signature wasn't the shape at all. It was that small, legendary piece of glass, the Vision panel. Set low on the A-pillar, the extra window gave drivers a clearer view of children walking near the front bumper. Safety officers loved it. Schools that wanted a modern, safer fleet started buying Visions as soon as budgets allowed. And kids remembered it too, especially the way sunlight poured through that panel and lit up their shoes while they waited to climb aboard each morning. Generation Z and Generation Alpha grew up with the Vision as their school bus. Bright, modern, and just futuristic enough to feel new. Whether it was the rounded hood, the cleaner interior, or that beam of light by the entrance, the Vision carved out its own place in America's collective memory. Not just a bus, but the symbol of a new era of safety and design. 2004 to present, Thomas C2. When the Thomas C2 rolled onto the scene in 2004, it didn't just look new, it looked almost unreal. The rounded front end, the sweeping curves, the huge one-piece windshield. It felt more like something from a science fiction movie than a school bus cruising down a suburban street. Kids noticed immediately. For many, this was the cool bus, the one that looked like it belonged in a futuristic city rather than parked behind a brick elementary school. One detail stood out the moment you stepped aboard: the tall, vertical door handle. Instead of the old metal lever or folding mechanism, you grabbed a long, upright bar. A small thing, but unforgettable to the students who touched it every morning. Inside, the C2 felt wide and bright. Oversized windows filled the cabin with sunlight, and the clean interior layout made everything seem open and airy. When it first appeared, the C2 sparked plenty of debate. Some people loved the bold new design, others thought it was too modern, too strange, too different from the school buses they grew up with. But over time, that controversy faded, and the C2 settled into the American landscape. Today, it's one of the most familiar sights on the road, a modern classic that reshaped what a school bus could look like. 1960s to 1990s, Carpenter Classic. Long before the rounded hoods and sleek windshields of modern school buses, the Carpenter Classic carried generations of American kids with a look that couldn't belong to any other era. Its shape was as square as a lunchbox, straight lines, flat panels, and a no-nonsense profile that felt right at home in the small towns and rural roads of the Midwest and the Appalachian region. If you grew up between the 1960s and the mid-1980s, chances are this was the bus you remember rumbling up to your stop. Inside, the Carpenter had a character all its own. The cabin was a little dimmer than today's bright interiors, lit by narrow windows that gave the whole space a slightly muted, old America feeling. The engine sent a steady vibration through the floor, and kids could feel it under their feet as the bus pulled away from the curb. And then there was the door, a thick steel slab that shut with a deep, unmistakable boom that echoed through the aisle. By the late 80s and 90s, the Carpenter Classic showed up everywhere on television, usually in family dramas or small-town school scenes. To older Americans today, it represents something more than transportation. It's a snapshot of a bygone America, simple, sturdy, and a little rough around the edges, just like the era it came from. 1990s, Ward, AmTran Genesis. If school buses had personalities, The Ward, later AmTran, Genesis would be the bold, box-shaped extrovert you could spot from across the parking lot. This was the squarest of all the Type D designs, a front end so flat and upright it looked almost like a rolling shipping container. For kids who went to school in the 1990s, especially between 1993 and 2000, the Genesis was impossible to miss, and even harder to forget. The moment you stepped aboard, you felt the difference. The entryway sat higher than most buses of its time, and every child remembers climbing those 2, sometimes 3, tall steps before reaching the aisle. Inside, the Genesis offered a brighter cabin than many of its older peers, helped by its wide windows and clean, boxy interior lines. And outside, one detail stood out to anyone watching it pull up. The headlamps mounted high on the front panel, giving the whole bus a look that was equal parts practical and distinctive. For students born between 1985 and 1998, the Genesis was a daily presence, from morning pickup to after-school drop-off, from cold winter routes to spring field trips. It may not have been the most elegant school bus ever built, but it was one of the most recognizable. And in the 1990s, nothing else on the road looked quite like it. 1979 to 2004, International S-Series bus. For a full quarter century, the International S-Series was the backbone of American school transportation, the chassis almost every district relied on, and the one nearly every child from 1980 to 2000 can instantly picture. That square hood with the round headlights set wide apart became a national silhouette, rolling through big cities, small towns, and every rural route in between. If there was such a thing as a default American school bus, this was it. Kids remember the sensations as much as the shape. The steady shake of the DT-466 under the floorboards, the low diesel rumble drifting through the aisle, and that familiar smell that clung to winter coats on the ride home. For many, the S-Series defined the classic school day moment. A row of kids with fogged-up windows, hands pressed against the glass as the bus bounced over a rough patch of road. And it wasn't just real life. The S-Series appeared in countless American movies and TV shows throughout the 80s and 90s, becoming part of the visual language of growing up in the United States. Tough, dependable, and instantly recognizable, it served generation after generation. No other school bus spent more time in more towns, carrying more kids to class for more years. 1970s to 1990s, GMC Bluebird CV200. Not every school bus was a giant yellow giant rumbling down a state highway. For millions of kids growing up in rural towns and quiet suburbs, the GMC/Bluebird CV200 was the friendlier face of school transportation. Smaller, lighter, and perfectly sized for neighborhood routes. As a Type A design, it sat right between a true minibus and the larger Type C models, making it a favorite for short runs, tight streets, and schools that didn't need a full-size fleet. Children in the 70s, 80s, and 90s saw the CV200 almost every day, especially in communities where 1 or 2 loops around the block covered most of the morning pickup. Its GMC front end had a look all its own, a compact hood, clean lines, and a stance that felt approachable, even to the youngest riders stepping aboard for the first time. Because it was the go-to choice for short-distance transportation, kids encountered it constantly, on quick rides to elementary school, on field trips to local parks, or circling through cul-de-sacs and winding neighborhood roads. Many remember climbing into a CV200 for the very first big kid outing, the feeling of sitting in a school bus that felt just their size. For countless American children, the CV200 wasn't just another model. It was the everyday, close-to-home bus that shaped their earliest memories of school. 1967 to 1998, Ford B-Series school bus. Long before modern buses filled the morning streets, the Ford B-Series carved out a place in the American landscape that still feels warm and familiar today. Picture it, a deep yellow Ford cresting a rise, rolling past open fields and weathered barns, dust trailing behind it in the early light. That image alone is pure Americana, a snapshot of the 1970s and 80s that countless rural families remember vividly. Before 1990, the B-Series was everywhere on the West Coast and throughout the Midwest, serving districts that needed something strong, simple, and dependable. Kids recall the unmistakable sound of its Ford engine, a throaty, hard-working growl that echoed through farm roads and gravel driveways. And then there was the door, a classic hand-folding mechanism that clattered shut with a familiar rhythm as students climbed aboard. In rural communities, these buses stayed in service for decades, often longer than any other model on the lot. Generations of children rode the very same B-Series to small elementary schools, Friday football games, and community events. And thanks to its long run, the Ford appeared in countless older American films, becoming part of the visual memory of an entire era. For many, the B-Series wasn't just a school bus, it was the feeling of growing up in the American heartland. In the end, these 10 school buses were more than machines painted yellow. They were the rhythm of childhood in America. The early morning rumble, the cold vinyl seats, the fogged-up windows, and the long rides home on winter afternoons. They carried generations of kids across decades of change, from rural back roads to big city boulevards, and each one left its own mark on the memories we still hold close. If one of these buses was part of your story, if you can still hear the engine or picture the driver who knew every neighborhood kid by name,